Good evening and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Wednesday. For those of you watching the recording afterwards, thanks for joining us. We'll give everyone a few seconds here to join. And quick audio check as we get started. Great to see some friendly names. Feel free to throw in the notes where about in the great continent you're dialing in from tonight. Great to see some familiar names. And we've got some fantastic content and some great conversations this evening.
Eric, how's the weather where you're at tonight?
You know what? Better. 65 degrees and sunny.
Same thing. We're here in Michigan. We had some good weather today. 68 degrees.
Yeah, coming back from Sarasota, we had sunny and 75 at the March break with the kiddos, which I realized that it's not vacation, it's just parenting in a different city.
Only it's harder.
Exactly. It's one of those, boy, I can't wait to go to the beach, right? And then, oh my God, the beach has sand. I don't like sand. Now I'm not happy. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Martinsburg, West Virginia. Welcome. All right. We've also got Orlando, fantastic. Vancouver, beautiful. Charlotte was just down the Carolinas not too long ago. And yeah, perfect. Well, without further ado, let's jump in because we've got certainly some great components this evening, and it's a top topic. Now, it's funny, as we've shared this with many different clients, and we've got lots of serious clients on, lots of compliance training partners on. If this is the first webinar you've joined of ours, welcome. It's a privilege to be doing these. We do these every couple of months, and certainly this is one of the most requested components, which is compliance. And the question we always get, Carson, is, gosh, what the heck does leases have to do with OSHA and HIPAA compliance? So we'll help to demystify some of that today. For those of you that don't know Dr. Carson Carpenter, it's a privilege. He's become a great personal friend. He keeps me young, and I try to do the same. Carson's had been practicing for over 40 years, and very early on in the career back in 1989, realized that with all the new legislation in place, that training and awareness and knowledge amongst the dental community was lacking. So really founded Compliance Training Partners with the vision to help make sure that education, awareness, and if the proverbial piece hits the fan, right, how do we go through? So Compliance Training Partners, long-standing partner of Cirrus. We've had the privilege of doing many, many of these. Carson and I have crisscrossed the country and trade shows and whatnot across the board. So fantastic information to make sure that no different than the leases, how do we make some proactive investments versus that reactive cost, right, in the event of that. With that being said, I would argue there's no other company that has been involved and helped more doctors with OSHA and HIPAA and infection control inspections across all 50 states and territories. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carson Carpenter. Thanks for joining us, Carson.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to be here. We've done a few of these webinars together, and it's interesting. You mentioned the question, what does compliance and leasing contracts, leasing arrangements have to do with one another? It's really, I think, you and I that figured it out at a meeting when I told you my frustration with doctors who wanted to get in compliance. They really did. But they said, Carson, I've taken your course. I see what we need to do, but we're not able to do it. Our physical facility won't allow it. And I think you and I realize that this is a key thing. This is a really key reason why you need the right lease. And again, Eric's been a good friend. We've worked together for many years. Eric, people who don't know them, probably maybe people who are attending tonight who are Compliance Training Partners clients. Eric is the president of Cirrus Consulting Group. He has helped me both as a tenant reviewing my leases many years ago, Also, as a landlord, when the tables shifted and I became a landlord when I sold the practice, he's also helped many colleagues of mine. And what I particularly like is that he can help us as dentists stay out of trouble. I mean, you know yourself, no matter where you went to dental school, we didn't get much business training. And we have a lot of risk, both legally and dollar-wise, with the wrong lease. I can tell you plenty of stories. Eric can tell you even more. So really great to be doing this with you again tonight, Eric. And I think everybody's going to get some real benefit out of this evening.
Yes, sir. Fantastic. So we're going to help customize tonight. Again, we're live. A lot of these things seem to be remote or virtual or AI. This is actually Eric and Carson here,
It
and
is.
we tend to have some a little extra enthusiasm to keep things interesting. Look, we appreciate your time. We know things have changed a lot post-COVID. So quick poll coming up. That's good for Carson and I, and we can help to, depending on your situation, knowledge level, we'll customize some of these components for tonight. This is a really interesting one. We thought we'd go right to the knowledge pearl. Some of the biggest feedback from our CE courses is let's just get right to it. So, Carson, you've had the privilege and really interesting opportunity to be getting, hundreds and hundreds of calls every month from when that proverbial, crap hits the fan. Maybe if you can share with, our few hundred attendees in terms of the trends and issues, what are some of the top things you're seeing in 2025 and any sort of pearls of knowledge and wisdom that we can share to kick things off tonight?
I'd be glad to. And as I mentioned when we were talking before the webinar, I've been involved in inspections, public health department, state, territory, OSHA, HIPAA. I've been involved in inspections really all over the country. And they all have some common things. And I'd like to talk about that. But the real trend I see is this: an educated, a knowledgeable workforce. It used to be that inspections tended to occur randomly. Health departments, OSHA, provincial safety committees set up these inspections randomly. They said, well, we have to inspect X number of offices this month, this year. That's not the case anymore. Why? It's all employee generated complaints. Believe me, your employees know what their rights are. Your employees know what compliance looks like. Well, you might say, well, that's a good thing. Well, it's good and bad. The trend that I see is they weaponize this. I've got several inspections on my desk right now that they all start the same way. Employee complaint, anonymous employee complaint. So what my takeaway from this is for 2025, we need to get in compliance. And that's why I'm just going to do a 50,000-foot review a little later tonight on what compliance looks like. Because if you don't figure out what it is, your employees are, and it's going to create problems for you.
One business owner to another, Carson, that just makes my skin crawl because for the amount that so many dentists as business owners do for the staff to attract, retain, train, do everything possible, the holidays, the parties, etc., to know that as you're working with them, and heck, a lot of these responsibilities fall to the employees as well in terms of enforcement and following through the process. That's just
Oh, you're so right. You're so right. It's upsetting, but we just have to get beyond that and protect our business, protect our license, protect our livelihood. That's what we have to do.
Yeah. Certainly what we're seeing on the landlord side, the lease negotiation side, is it's interesting. For the doctors, and I'm looking here, roughly looks like 37% are thinking of transitioning or selling within the next 5+ years. So to that perspective, the world has changed a lot. When Carson started practicing back in the 80s, it was far easier to open a clinic and build out a clinic, and a lot less regulations and a lot less loopholes and hoops to jump through in order to get there. These days, the number one, talk to any practice broker across the country, especially in the major urban areas, and the number one reason why a practice deal dies at the 11th hour is because of the stupid lease agreement.
Believe it.
So, and no different from Dr. Carpenter's situation where in this case of an owned situation, looks like we've got about 18% own their building. So similar to Dr. Carpenter, it becomes a component where, hey, I don't even think you were planning to keep the building or become a full-time landlord until great opportunity to sell the clinic, right? And then, well, I guess I'll keep the building as a passive form of income.
No, and it was, and when I look back when I did that, it was written by a trusted attorney. But I realized once you looked at it years later, they were trusted. They did their best possible job. They didn't really understand the unique problems we have in dentistry.
And it's interesting. So we are seeing the two trends that on the one, if you're leasing your clinic and looking to sell, the banks are driving all the behavior because, Bank of America or others, and of no surprise, they will not issue a long-term loan to your buyer if there's insufficient term on the lease. There are certain banks in North America, they will not issue a 12-year payback, meaning if you're going to get $1 million loan to buy Dr. Carson's practice, right? That $1 million loan, they would spread it over a 12-year term, right? To pay it back over. These days, some banks will not issue a 12-year payback schedule unless there's at least 10 years and multiple different options to renew. Meaning, if there's not 12 years of a clean lease with no demolition, relocation, or lack of term, right? Because the banks have been burned one too many times where they've given the doctor $1 million and suddenly, whoops, 3 years later, right, we're out. The landlord's found some way to push us out of the space, and now, shoot, I need another $350 per square foot to go build out a clinic across the street. So the biggest trends we're seeing lately is the huge impact on the lease on the eventual saleability. And then also now upwards of 64% of doctors are overpaying in rent. So, Dr. Carson, I'm going to ask you this one. So, the dentist is, as you know firsthand, the best tenant on the planet. The highest build out costs, 300, 350 at one in the Bay Area, $450 per square foot.
Wow.
Lowest default rates at 0.5%, right? Restaurants well over 90%. You're in the same location for 26 and a half years on average. You're COVID proof. You can't work from home regardless of what your staff tells you, right? And certainly always bringing in high quality foot traffic. So why do you think that more than half of dentists, because even though they're the best tenants on the planet, why do you think the vast majority are overpaying in rent, Carson?
I think it's because they just don't know. There's no knowledge base. They don't know what standard rates should be. They're at the mercy of the bank or the people, the landlord, which is I think where you come in. I didn't know anything about this till I met you and talked with you.
So we're going to dig all into that, guys. That's a great run through. We've got a bit of a word salad here, but ultimately, all we're trying to do is to help. And, Carson started doing this in 1989. Cirrus was founded back in 1994 with the whole premise to say, look, keep doctors being great doctors. For any minute you're spending not being chairside and things that you might do once or twice in a lifetime, outsource to an expert. Things that you've got to do 2, 3 times a year, do it yourself. But these are the key things that can be key. So roughly 24%, Carson, planning to open or relocate. So that's good timing. We've got at least a quarter of the people on that are contemplating a new space or relocating because of, right, perhaps some compliance issues. Also, a few, again, looking to transition, a number looking to stay put, right? And some with month-to-month leases, which can be an interesting opportunity. And again, some that own their building, which we'll touch on as well. Perfect. All right. So from that perspective, Carson, over to you, sir.
Now, let me just give you just a 50,000 foot view of what we're talking about here. First of all, OSHA compliance, and of course, if you're in Canada, we're talking about your provincial OSHA equivalent compliance. But it's required by the law because why? It makes the workplace safer. When I say reduces liability for your business, if you're not in compliance, it's not just the fines that you can get, it's the legal issues that follow. And don't forget that training of all staff, it needs to be done annually. All new employees need to be onboarded. You can go to the next slide. And really, some of the basic areas, first of all, chemical safety, that's called hazard communication. Some people call it the right to know law. We've got to have our people educated and have the right protective equipment to protect them from the chemicals that are in our workplace. Now, granted, these chemicals that we have are no more hazardous than the things we might have in our basement, our barn, our garage, but this is a workplace, and employees need to know what safety measures they need to take to protect them. Go to the next slide. Also, you can imagine that safety for workers includes safety with blood or what they call other potentially infectious materials, like saliva in a dental setting. So OSHA is very concerned about bloodborne pathogens, chemicals, and you can go to the next slide. And this is just a quick view of some things you might not even realize. They're also concerned about electrical safety and fire safety and ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. How do you get out of a place? Egress. So these are all things, and many of these we're going to tie into tonight into having the proper lease, having the proper facility. Next slide.
And it was interesting because on the OBG there was a recent news article floating through and all the mom groups, and as my wife is a young mother, etc. There was an OBGYN and it was all over the news that there was over 2,500 patients that may have been exposed to bloodborne ailments, and were required to get HIV testing, etc., etc. I mean, those are so devastating across the board.
You're
And
right, Eric, and it's not just, I mean, if it was a 10, 20, 30, $40,000 fine, that's not going to make us happy, but that it's not going to put us out of business. What'll put you out of business is what you just said.
right. So, as Carson mentioned, right, on the compliance side, we're the we're the sweet spot as it pertains to lease negotiations. Fundamentally, is there's always a fundamental flaw with the traditional sense of, for those of you 25% looking to relocate, the challenge is local brokers being paid for by the landlord, usually 3 or 4% of whatever the doctor pays over the long-term lease, right? And therefore, the more the doctor pays, the higher the commissions. We've always been there, paid directly by the clients. We're there to advise, we're there to help, no different than compliance training partners. And we've had the privilege of working with over 13,000 doctors over the past 30 years to help ensure that we're not overpaying in rent, and we're helping to minimize those risks, because the last thing we need is to, walk in and have that surprise where suddenly you get the brown envelope on the door and we're being forced to relocate. We're inability to sell the clinic, right? In some cases these days, we're seeing landlords actually terminate the lease and engage directly with the buyer because they have that right. The landlord has the right to terminate the lease if you ask to transfer the lease, right, through the assignment provision within that agreement that you may have signed back in 1989. From that perspective, and to Carson's point earlier, is the data, right? If you have not, I was chatting with Aprio, one of the big national accounting firms, and one of the big things that they're doing with all their clients is asking and saying, when was the last time you compared your rent to fair and accurate market rent? And right, the answers have been pretty astounding. Most haven't checked to see if they are overpaying in rent. It's one of those, well, Carson, I'll just wait till my lease comes up for renewal. Now the landlord wants to take me from 35 to 40, and I'll come back at 37, and we'll end up at 39. Right. And I guess, I've now got a 40% rent increase. And we just roll over. So that has to stop, right? We have to your point, Carson, protect ourselves, have the data. Let's stop overpaying in rent, and let's make sure that we leverage our leverage, because you are far too good of a tenant to be, being overpaying in rent or being unaware. It's pretty remarkable, because with costs, when you look at a $5,000 per month lease. Now, Carson, you've got it from the best side now. You're on the landlord side. But at
Right?
$5,000 a month, not even including triple nets, but assuming a regular, reasonable annual increase, that $5,000 a month can easily be upwards of $2.9 to $3 million over the next 30 years that the clinic is in that same location. So the lease becomes the biggest check that you will sign in your personal and professional lives. And again, from a compliance perspective, That's the big adage that Carson I keep sharing as we're crisscrossing the country is, is think of your landlord as the partner to help to keep you in compliance. And you might think that that is nuts because what the heck does my landlord care about me, let alone care about me being in compliance? But they do care about your rent. They do, regardless of what they say, want to keep you and keep that check coming in because, again, your check is like gold and you were the only one that didn't sort of get any help and paid the rent all the way through COVID. Right. So this now gives you the opportunity to think of, hey, if I am going to make a investment, every dollar, every wall, every washing machine, every change, every electrical, every plumbing piece that you do in there immediately becomes the asset of the landlord. And in your next renewal, it is very likely that we can negotiate for some tenant improvement allowance or some free rent or otherwise. What we don't want is to say, shoot, Carson's identified these pieces. I need to make these significant improvements in order to be compliant. But, right, I don't have the physical space or I need to spend $50,000 to make some changes to my physical space. And then the lease comes up in a year or two. Right? If you've just made a significant investment in the space, first of all, you've got to advise the landlord for their approval. And then secondly, now that they know you're going to come up for renegotiation in a year or two or three from now, and they're going to laugh and say, Carson, you're not going anywhere. You just spent 50 grand on the space and you added an operatory. So leverage your leverage. And definitely as we go through these pieces, there are so many different financial variables on how, and this is a great one for a screenshot, is most doctors are unaware that common area maintenance, for example, is negotiable. Common area maintenance, there can be exclusions, there can be common area maintenance caps, right? Today in Carson's building, if he had to redo the roof, he can pass on all those costs onto the tenant at once, right? Fantastic for a landlord, not great for a dentist. So the last thing you want is a surprise $30,000 that drops down, onto your common area maintenance fee at the end of the year or a true up or otherwise. So bottom line, these are just some of the 7 main financial variables, and make sure that you're making the most through your next lease negotiation. Ultimately, what should it do? The big one is let's keep it fair. Let's make sure we have very affordable financial terms. Let's keep that stability, security across the board. Let's minimize some of that risk. And also another great one, now that we're talking about compliance, health, safety, etc., is your own health. Unfortunately, there's been so many examples where unfortunately a doctor has passed away or some other tragedy has occurred. One main thing I'll suggest with each is to make sure that you have a dental specific death and disability clause in your leases. That can be very important that heaven forbid you pass away, or like my godfather tore his rotator cuff, right? Golfing and could no longer practice wet finger dentistry. You have to look out for you. You are the sole breadwinner. You have the world's weight on your shoulders. And these are, so one of the reasons why we really coined our household name in dental for leases is because we were creating some of this language 30 years ago. And it's a simple termination right. If, you might not be disabled, but you're certainly not practicing chairside. So adding a death and disability clause can be a, huge amount of savings. I've shared the story with Carson in the past, but there was a devastating example of a doctor who was 43 years of age, built out a beautiful 6 operatory clinic, and 3 weeks prior to the grand opening had died of a massive heart attack. Fully built out clinic, no doctor, no patients, right? The clinic was worth, unfortunately, zero, less than zero. Bank got the pound of flesh from the life insurance policy, but the worst part of it all, the landlord went back to the spouse and said, unfortunately, Mrs. Smith, you're now responsible for the roughly $9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease.
Hmm.
So, in the essence of protection, proactive investment versus reactive cost, compliance, and just, again, being a good steward to the estate, you certainly owe it to yourself, your staff, your family, your patients, etc., to make sure that, the tiniest little things can dramatically impact the stability and saleability of the clinic, right? And can yield unwieldy liability. For those of you, 10 or 15% that own your building, again, as Dr. Carson mentioned, you are not in the clear. You are also then, even though you lease versus buying, for those of you that are relocating, sure, there's definitely some pros and cons with each, but regardless, you will still need a lease separating the real estate corporation from the practice corporation. That's to get a loan approved, for example, right? The banks will want to have something, a lease that separates the two, defining terms, the parties, how much is spent, what the annual increases are, etc. Liability, slips and falls. Who's responsible for what, right? Your building versus your practice. And lots of others in terms of tax and audits, right? Was the tax accountant do everything properly within that first year? And there's some time specifications for that. And then also, right, are you overpaying or underpaying in rent? When was the last time you have some supporting documents that show what in fact it is, right? And what is fair market rent for a dental clinic in the area? And then certainly lastly, just like Carson, to maximize the value of your building and the value of the clinic, it's so much easier to have a lease in place prior to the sale rather than drafting at the time of sale, which becomes ripe for renegotiation. So ultimately, right, leverage your leverage. And these are just some, again, another one for a good screenshot for those of you watching on your phone or otherwise. But these are just some of the dozens of clauses we focus on that can easily have over $100,000 worth of traps hidden within your lease agreement. Some keen ones to be aware of that's becoming much more relevant is demolitions. With all the redevelopment in major urban centers, many landlords now, right from day one, are adding in clauses that with as little as 6 months worth of notice, just for thinking about redeveloping the building, can kick out the dentist and you could have a 15, 20-year term and options. But if that's in place, it's the magic get out of jail free card that the landlord can use in order to terminate the lease and move you out. Similarly, in some cases even worse, relocation. Relocation is such that in many cases less than 3 months worth of notice, the landlord reserves the right to move you into any different space in your building or potentially in the buildings that the landlord owns. And in some cases, the landlord will cover some of the costs, but rarely do they ever cover the vast majority of the costs. And the biggest issue we see, compliance-wise or otherwise, is that there's no assurance that if you have to be out by the end of July, there is no guarantee that the new space is up and running and built out for you. So then you become down and lights out for multiple months trying to catch that over. So a very high level, just some of the main red flags and issues. Yet lots of value. And again, as your landlord, as you're focusing on improving the space, becoming compliant, leveraging these components, there are so many different variables that the landlord may do. Fixturing is a great one. While you are physically fixing up the space or adding an operatory or otherwise, very common to have that in a new lease or new landlord or new build out type of situation, to have fixturing 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 months and free rent. If you're committing to a 10-year term, that could be well over $1 million. Not uncommon to ask multiple months of free rent. We recently secured 10 months of free rent for a doctor on a renewal. So every January over the next 10 years came in at $0, right? Well over $100,000 of savings just from that one month per year. But these are the type of things, by really swinging for the fences and having some good professional help, is key. Tenant improvement allowance, last but not least, is another great one where, really looking at it from that perspective, we helped a doctor get $15,000 for a new HVAC system. So just don't pay for things because you think you should or need to, and maybe you are obligated, but it certainly doesn't mean that the landlord doesn't have budget to help for it. So again, think of any different improvement, change to the space. Think first, who else can I get to pay for this? And in many cases, it can be the landlord. Carson, these are some key ones you've seen. we're going to come to your section here and some of the components, but any other best practices there and other things you've seen where doctors and their physical space has become the challenge and some good things that have resulted at the end.
Well, I have, and you know, one of the things that you said, the first bullet point on one slide, I really like that. We are the best, as dentists, we are the best tenants in the world. And let me tell you, now that the roles have been reversed and I am a landlord, let me tell you, the most valuable tenant in my 16,000 square foot building is the dental office. Why? Because once they're there, they're going to stay, right? They're going to stay. All the expense that's been put into that, the fact that patients don't like to go to a new location, I mean, they are worth gold. So now to put the shoe on the other foot, remember, you are extremely valuable to me, the landlord. So when you're negotiating that lease, trust me, you've got some power. They want you. Maybe that's the reason why my original contract, Eric, that you looked at, my original rental agreement, I'll go again, although it was written by a well-intentioned attorney, I don't think they realize sometimes just how hard it is for us as dentists to move. For them as an attorney, as an accountant, what I need to move, the building's going to be changed around, no problem. I can find office space anywhere. Leasehold improvements, they don't cost anything. So use your power. And some of the things that I've seen, for example, the regulations say we need to do laundry for the protective equipment, for the scrubs or long sleeve lab coats on site. Well, doctors say to me, look, I know that's the regulation, but there's no place to do it. We don't have the connections to do it. We don't have the drainage set up. We don't have enough room. Well, guess what? You're going to renegotiate that lease. Your landlord wants you to be compliant, I believe. A compliant and successful office is going to be a better long-term tenant. So as Eric said, get them to help you make that space so you can have a laundry room to do it on site. I don't think you want to use all disposable clothing. You probably don't want to have it picked up by a laundry service. That's just not workable. So this is one of the areas that I see. Next slide. Another area where I see problems, you've got to have a proper design of your facility for proper egress. How do you get out of a facility, you know, safely? I can't tell you how many offices I've seen over the years that do not pass muster for this. They don't either have the right amount of egress doors, or they don't have, for example, crash bars on those doors. Say you don't want somebody just walking in a back door that might face a parking lot, but you need to have a crash bar on it. Well, when it comes time to redo that lease, what a great time to say, look, we got a couple problems here. We need some emergency lighting. We need some special exit doors. We need some of this signage that has a battery backup for exit, not an exit, emergency exit. What a great time to do it. Wouldn't you agree, Eric? These things need to be done. Do it where you have some leverage. And we've been able to get doctors to take advantage of this and get the landlord to help pay for these compliance measures that, quite frankly, are going to cost you a lot of money otherwise.
Yeah, that's it. It's a key point because as you're thinking about, oh, I've got this old stairwell, and oh, sometimes gosh, the elevator's been such an issue, and oh, the landlord's been unresponsive, etc. Right? It's especially when the wallet is open, you'd be amazed what the landlord will do, and
Listen,
especially as it becomes to safety, liability, etc. There's so many devastating examples. Heck, there was one recently with I forget where it was in the globe, but there was a big, a concert and there was fire and, catastrophe. So, and then of course, that's a terrible situation. So the more things that can be done in advance, right, especially as it pertains to safety and liability, you'll find the landlord, definitely, if it's those sorts of things, doors, windows, etc., right, certainly that just only increases the value of their building.
well, Eric, I haven't even told you about this story. It just came to mind. But we had a client recently who called us, and what their concern was that they do IV sedation. And by law, you have to have power backup. You can't suddenly have no electricity, right? That's kind of a problem
Sure.
when you're doing IV sedation. You've got some patient out. And we actually, we remembered, you'd be proud of us, we remembered to ask the client, hey, you don't happen to have a lease coming up? Well, yeah, we've got one coming up in less than a year.
Hmm.
Guess what? That, because that doctor is the most valuable tenant in the building for the reasons you said. We don't go anywhere. As dentists, we're wonderful tenants. They were able to get them to put in a generator in the building that powered just their facility. I think it was about a 25 kW generator, but still, what's that? There's almost $20,000 for the
Fantastic.
generator and the installation cost. That if that question hadn't been asked, I don't think that landlord would have provided that generator otherwise, do you?
No, I mean, again, look, it's it's always a good reminder. There's no college of landlords, right? There's no ethics. There's no Hippocratic oath that the landlords take, right? It is a for-profit business, and that's okay, right? That's life. But certainly, again, it's the old adage in life: you don't get what you deserve, what you get what you negotiate for.
Well, listen, that's what we tell everybody now. When you're negotiating for a lease, make sure you get at least a 20 kW generator put on there, because what does it cost for you when your producers are down for a day or more? Okay, it's really expensive. Get them to help you pay for that. Another issue that I see, ventilation. Okay, ventilation, we all learned during COVID especially, is really important. Now, ventilation can be vent fans. What a great time to get them to install vent fans in your labs, in your sterilization room. Um, what about your high volume evacuation system? Do you have a problem? Maybe the office is old. Some of the lines, the lumen has become smaller. They need to be redone. What a great time to do some plumbing and have the landlord participate. Another thing, the heating and cooling system. We have found that a quality heating and cooling system, a modern, up-to-date heating and cooling system that is able to have quality filtration on it, an adequate blower, so you're getting 6, 7 exchanges of air an hour, can make a huge difference. Again, I think the great time to do that is rather than with your dollar when you're negotiating that lease. Next slide.
One thing I'd add to that is probably 60 to 70% of the leases we see, the landlord has put in a provision where they own the HVAC system. If it breaks, it's the tenant's responsibility to replace it 5,
Yeah.
10, 15 grand later.
Oh, we got burned with that before. Oh, yeah.
But
Yep.
the other piece to be aware of as well is in many standard leases, they will state that it is the tenant's responsibility to engage in an HVAC maintenance contract. And they might not inspect it, but if the proverbial crap hits the fan, literally, then again, it adds extra penalties and/or extra expenses if you haven't been maintaining it. So in some cases, through your leases, there may be a specific extra requirement as you, as the tenant, that you are responsible for a maintenance contract for the HVAC system.
Yeah, and all those things are hard to change after that lease is signed, right?
Correct,
Not
right?
going to happen then.
If you're 1 year into a 10-year term, the landlord's already sort of, okay, hey, I'm done, right? The cash is in the bank and otherwise. But, it makes it far easier when you renew. It's a good part is for those of you that might think, oh, I've got another 10 years. Well, is it 10 or is it, well, actually it's up in 2 years and then I've got a 5-year renewal option and another 5-year renewal option. So it's not, because if you don't notify the landlord via registered mail or whenever that may be, and you don't exercise that in time, then the remaining options become null and void. And then the landlord can literally do whatever they want and increase rent, make changes. So the best thing to do is to start the lease negotiation process 2 years in advance, because how long does it take in Ann Arbor to relocate a dental clinic? At least 18 months from the time you
I
wake
agree.
up, look across the street, and go through the process.
I agree. And you know what? Again, Eric, trust me, I'm sure everybody in this call, it's the same way. When we're in dental school, we get barely any business training, let alone any information about leases, which turn out to be such a critical thing. We rely on an attorney who may or may not understand dentistry. It can be disastrous. I'll give you an example. There's a subpart in the US OSHA regulations for materials handling, storage, use. And of course, we have some components, some products that come under this, namely our compressed gases. Most of us have oxygen, of course, nitrous oxide, some have nitrogen, some have helium, but compressed gas tanks, they're top heavy, they're under pressure, they can turn into a bomb. So I think that is the perfect time to make sure that you have a properly designed room. You can't believe where some people put some of these tanks. Older offices, they didn't follow these regulations. I'm just throwing out today some areas where I've seen our clients run into trouble and have successfully been able to get the landlord to pay for some of these things. And trust me, now I'm putting on my landlord shoes now that I'm not practicing, although I do a little moonlighting in a friend's office. I see my family and friends, and they don't pay me. I'm not sure why I do it, but I'm still a dentist. I keep my license. I like to do it. But I will tell you that as a landlord now, believe me, whatever my dental client wants it, and they take up half the building, I'm going to keep them happy. Believe me, they want to keep you happy too, but you need to talk to them before that lease is done. Next slide. Electrical safety. There's another thing. You know how many offices contact our technical services department of Compliance Training Partners? They said, look, we took your course. We're a little bit concerned about what you said about electricity. We don't see ground fault interrupters in some of our wet areas. We have it in one bathroom. We don't have it in the kitchen. We don't have it in the sterilization room. You know, no, these aren't big expenses, but they add up. What a great time to make sure when you're going to renegotiate or negotiate a lease, say, look, we have some special situations here. National Electrical Code says you need to have ground fault interrupters in kitchens, well, in any wet area. So obviously kitchens, bathrooms, but they may not understand that for us, a wet area is also our laboratory, our sterilization room. So next slide. And ergonomics. You know, a poorly designed facility can really be tough on your body. And I don't know if you know this, but studies conducted all over the world, and I've read them from these really diverse areas, Poland, the US, England, Japan, about 70% of dentists have cervical neck problems or lower back problems. So in an operatory, I don't know if you've ever worked in an operatory. I worked in an operatory for years that wasn't properly designed, where there wasn't enough room behind the patient. There wasn't enough room at the sides. And I had to make those class 3 and 4 movements, which are deadly over a dental career. So you know what? Before you negotiate that lease, get somebody, for example, from ADEC in there or Midmark, whoever you're buying your equipment from. Get them to give you some ideal dimensions, and let's let that landlord help you with that. Next slide.
And that's a great point in the design.
It really is.
Right through the lease negotiation, it goes through. And yeah, if you want to do continental delivery at 12 o'clock, right? Can you fit the ADEC, right? Cabinetry behind you? And those are the type of things that it's far easier to do in the design stage than after you've signed something. And then suddenly they say, whoops, right?
And you probably can, Eric. You can probably find a way to get it in any room, but that extra 6 inches can make a difference in you having a lifelong back problem or not. I know, I've been there as a young dentist working in the wrong type of operatories. Another area when you're talking about design is sterilization. This Centers for Disease Control specifically states you've got to divide your sterilization area into these 4 areas. What a great time to have your landlord help you with this. Now, when I say divided, I don't mean walls between them. It needs to be like this, where there's a sterilization center made of the proper materials, designed in the proper way, And let me tell you, if my tenant needed some help there and they were going to sign a 6-year lease, believe me, I'm going to help them, and yours will help you too. But you need to be knowledgeable about this. Next slide. I mean, do you have room for an instrument washer? What about you find out you've seen enough patients, you need 2 ultrasonic cleaners. You need an area for a pre-soak. Do you have the room? What about autoclaves? Our classes teach about the fact that you need to have some backup. I mean, what do you do if number 1 and number 2 autoclaves are out? You need to have some backup. You don't have room, okay? So what a great time when you're designing that sterilization room. Hey, landlord, we need to do some things to comply with CDC guidelines. We need a little help here. Next slide. And what about, again, I just show this picture, the operatory itself, but what about the fact that you need new seamless flooring in your operatories, in your laboratories? There's still a few offices out there that don't have that, and there's some that don't have the proper type of flooring. Maybe they have just linoleum squares rather than seamless vinyl flooring. What a great time to get them to pick that up. I mean, am I right, Eric? That's expensive stuff. That seamless vinyl flooring, that costs a lot of
Absolutely.
money.
Yeah, and any sort of leaks or otherwise creates a significant issue. The last thing you want to do deal with insurance and those sorts of things.
And you're
Also,
not in compliance. If you're not
right.
doing that, you're not, it's not just that it's a cool thing, you're not in compliance. And trust me, now again, I can say this because I'm now a landlord. If my dental tenant, who is my best tenant, needs a little help here, believe me, I'm going to do it. Next slide.
And as well, it's interesting if is there a cost built in? Is the landlord providing some of these, housekeeping services? Can that be excluded if you want to do it yourselves? Right? Are they what sort of cleaning and or right are they doing to disinfect? Is it daily? Is it every 2 days? Is it every 3 days? We've recently had someone join our team that used to work in a clinic, and our garbage gets picked up more often in our office than it was in the actual dental clinic that they were working at previously.
Yeah, that's, you're right. That could be a real problem, right? We're not the typical business. We're not. And what about things like this? Probably most of you know that you need to have an eye wash. Again, I'm just picking things here and there because, this isn't a full training tonight. This is just a short 50,000-foot view. You know how many offices have an eye wash? They have a couple squeeze bottles that say eye wash on them. That doesn't comply. You need to have adequate number of sinks for every operatory. You need to have the type of faucet, and these faucets are expensive. You need to have the type of faucet you can put an eye wash like this on. Again, landlord, I want to be compliant. We want to do this the right way. We want to stay here long term. I need some help here. Next slide. And I thought I would show you, you can go back one slide.
Okay.
There you go. I just wanted to do a quick review. I mean, what are they going to look for when there's a safety inspection? First of all, they want to see written documents. They want to see a written plan for chemical safety, bloodborne safety. They're going to walk around that facility. They're going to talk to employees. They want to make sure that there is a properly designed facility, the sterilization room is designed properly, that the laboratory is designed properly. They're going to make notes. They're going to take pictures. We need to make sure we're doing this the right way. And it's not that hard to be in OSHA compliance. It really isn't. But you've got to have the things I talk about here, and you've got to have the properly designed facility. If you don't, it's very hard to be in compliance. Next slide. And I'm just going to mention that tonight, a little later, we will put up a QR code so you can download an audit app. This is an audit app courtesy of taking this course where you can go through and see where am I in compliance with OSHA, infection control, HIPAA, and go through and see where you're weak, where you're strong, what you need to do. And you can maybe, again, take some things from here and apply them to helping your landlord help you with those things that you're going to need. Next slide, Eric.
Yeah. So where specifically in the lease can these things be? There's a few components that you want to look for, and it's the old as is, where is type of provisions. And the perception is, it is what it is. If you're evaluating a space that may have been a dental clinic, you might think, oh, fantastic, I've hit the gold mine. Be careful. How long has it been shut down, right? What was it used for previously? Was it a specialty clinic versus a GP, right? What would it take to get it back up and running and back into compliance? But these are things that right through the lease and landlord work, HVAC systems, electrical, right? Is it, phase two electrical? What does that work? We've seen three examples recently, Carson, where the doctor has signed a lease but cannot build out a dental clinic. One was because there was the landlord. Well, the landlord was fine, but the landlord only owned the unit. It was the condo board that actually controlled if they could core and drill. And in this case, the landlord,
Wow.
hardly let them do even a fraction of it, and nowhere near could they do the four operatories. Number one. Number two, that was a significant issue, was similarly the condo board would not upgrade from the 100 amp to a 200 amp service, which was needed to, right, facilitate and run everything that this large clinic needed. So this was a doctor who bought a ground floor retail unit for $1.6 million.
Wow.
And because afterwards, realizing, oh shoot, I can't get more than two chairs because of the way that the electrical was run. And now suddenly the condo board refuses to increase that. This poor doctor now has to either A, become a landlord and put in a juice store or something, or try to sell it. And this is
Wow.
after paying interest-only loan for over 12 months, and now suddenly over 16,000 a month in, right, between mortgage and interest now. So knowing specifically what things are, and more importantly, what can be done to negotiate these things are key. And definitely before signing anything, make sure that you're aware of what's within the lease, and then more importantly, that you get in the experts from the dental supply companies or otherwise to make sure that, yes, right, this can work. And or what the requirements are before you sign that binding letter of intent. And whether you like it or not, that's your new home, regardless of if you can even build out a dental clinic or not, right? You think, oh, well, if I can't build out a dental clinic, that's not my problem. Incorrect, right? If you sign that lease, the landlord doesn't care if you can see patients or not, right? This is now your new home.
Wow. And then this goes to show too why I stop and think about it. Serious, what you've done for us was almost as well. It was as valuable as an owner as it was when I was leasing, because you stop and think about it. At a certain point in your career, you want to buy a building. Yeah, you could get stuck, right? As an owner, you need to know these things too, not just as a tenant.
Yeah. If you talk to any of the experienced equipment team or otherwise, they all have some of these just devastating stories where suddenly, whoops, right, through the build out the water intake line, right? Well, maybe it's too small, and suddenly they're saying, look, this is going to be insufficient to run four chairs at the same time, right? Where, now they're pouring concrete. What about again, where is the sewage pipe going? After the concrete is poured, it could be upwards of $30,000 to fix one of those issues. So these are the type of things to be well aware of. HVAC, right? Similarly, can be all sorts of challenges, right? 1 ton of heating, cooling for every 250 square feet of rentable area. Again, rentable versus usable is the next one. Most don't realize you pay for your rentable square footage, yet, which might be 2,000 square feet, the actual usable, meaning where you can put flooring, etc., inside walls, outside walls, pillars, might only be 1,500 square feet. Could be a 500 square foot difference, right? You're still going to pay rent and your triple nets based on the rentable, but still, it's a good negotiable to say, my God, Mr. Landlord, look, I've got an odd shape. I don't have as much usable space, and you're having me pay for this common area, walkway back to the garbage bin type of thing. So those sorts of things are key. And even, the landlord's work getting a warranty on it. What will the landlord do through a build out? Will they build out the washroom? Another big issue we see doctors is not realizing the tens of thousands of dollars of difference between what is a gray shell uh, premises that you take over versus a vanilla shell. And in the essence of time, gray shell is, imagine walking into an empty space, and it's gray walls, it's gray floor, it's gray ceiling, it's concrete everywhere, but there's nothing. HVAC, there's the odd, cable hanging over, there's fire safety, and then that's about it. Vanilla shell means, walls are in, right? It looks white vanilla. And again, from that perspective, the difference can be tens of thousands of dollars between what is and what isn't. I mean, talk to some of the contractors. They will know exactly who had help negotiating their lease from a dental specific expert and those that didn't. And those that say, oh, the landlord's not doing your HVAC and whatnot for you, and some of your ventilation systems through here. No, they told me it was my responsibility. The
Eric, I tell you on the compliance end, because I see your first bullet point there is plumbing. We advise people, as a dentist, look, you've got to have an amalgam separator. Okay. Why not? That can require some fairly expensive plumbing and expensive device. Let your landlord get involved with that. You think I wouldn't do that for my tenant, again, who's just signed a 6-year lease? That dentist is a valuable tenant. So I on the plumbing end, I love to ask for that.
hang on. So as we wrap up, and we'll go to some Q&A, and I know that there's a ton, so feel free to post those into the Q&A. They can be anonymously or they can be done otherwise. Well, some of the biggest takeaways here and themes are proactive investment versus reactive cost. The landlords have found a way, other than Carson, hopefully there's not any others on here, but they've found a way to increase their profit without a penny of additional expense. And all it is looking at this as if it's hands on a watch face, right? The longer they stall, delay, and wait, the more opportunities they have to increase the rent because they know you can't relocate. So the best time is to start their lease negotiation process at least 2 years prior, knowing full well that it'll knock the landlord off the game. Now, if you just pick up the phone and reach out, right, that's not going to yield the success. But here's what we figured out over 30 years of doing this. Number one, get all the information, right? Find out your original lease from 1981, as well as any amendments, riders, exhibits, estoppel reviews, etc. And if it's not countersigned by the landlord, it's not worth the paper it's written on. But get all the facts. If you don't have it all, you can email, text your landlord, etc. Hey, I'm digitizing my records. Can you send me a copy? They'll send you a PDF, or their admin will send you a PDF, and within the hour. Get the information to find out what that is. And it is the lease from 1981 that is the governing document today that will dictate if and how you can sell your clinic. Number two, as Carson said, take a deep breath. Think about what that looks like. Am I going to keep my building? Am I going to just sell my clinic? What are all the different options I want? Am I going to transfer it to a child? Is it, what's my plan? What's my wife's plan? What are my long-term perspectives? Number three, and I appreciate it, Carson, is have your lease reviewed. It was sort of a running joke that until I finally cornered him one afternoon, and God, I forget where we were. I think it was New Orleans, and I said, "Hey, Carson, let me have a look at your lease."
Yeah, I
Right?
saw a lot of red lines on that. I thought I was back in school.
And then the market, right? The market data. If you haven't checked market rent, we will do it for you. And pull the local demographics, because data is absolutely key these days. We talk about AI and everything else. It is instrumental. And then last but not least, right? Outcome, strategy, development, right? But what I don't want you to do is walk into the clinic tomorrow and say, oh my gosh, I did a fantastic event last night with Carson, right? And Eric, right? And pick up the phone and call the landlord. Do not do that, right? Make sure that you've done all of those steps, and then negotiating the financials, then negotiate the business terms, right? And don't stop until you get to a final form lease that you're satisfied with. So two big takeaways, and we certainly appreciate, Carson, we'll pull that up in a second. We appreciate the app, and this is something that we can all download. While Cirrus, on that side, we don't have an app yet. What we do have is the ability to make sure that if you haven't compared your rent, we will send you the report and do the analysis from your lease to make sure we're not overpaying in base rent, annual increase, common area maintenance, any of those sort of components. So we will do a full complimentary lease review and rental rate analysis and demographic report. So there's a quick little poll that can allow you to request one quickly, and we can provide that for you because, again, if you haven't looked at the data, if you haven't had the lease reviewed, and in some cases, even the landlord has some obligations we touched on before that you don't want to put yourself in jeopardy of, especially if you've already transitioned. If you own and you are thinking of keeping or wanting the option to do a lease to own for the buyer, it is a great conversation to talk about rent and what that lease would look like from your left pocket to your right, from your real estate corporation to your practice corporation. And again, our team will spend a few hours on due diligence. We'll look through the traps and we'll schedule a Teams call such as this, where we'll go through your specific real estate reports for your building. In some cases, we can see how much it's sold for. We can see what other tenants are paying. In some cases, we can also see all that demographic data, market rents, comparables, other availabilities in the space. For those of you thinking of opening or buying or building, we do that. We have fantastic software that can look at ground floor retail rates between 1,200 square feet within a 15-minute drive at rush hour from your office today in Ann Arbor, for example, and look at the 15 spaces that might be suitable. And we can all do that right in a Teams call from the comfort of your home on a Saturday morning or otherwise. So highly, highly suggest that and be aware. The other thing I can't suggest more of is to follow this QR code and download the app. It is a great way to do a quick check and to see if you are in compliant or not. Carson, please share a little more about this great thing you've just developed. First of its
Really,
kind, to my
you
knowledge.
really hit the nail right on the head. Really, what this is all about is this is something you should do soon and you should do once a year. Whoever you put in charge of compliance, make sure that they do this. You can delegate this to them, but you need to hold them accountable. And wherever there are no's, we need to get those things fixed. It's an easy process. Just like when we take off in an airplane, we've got to have a checklist. Same thing here.
Fantastic. We'll throw it to some Q&A. I see a few that are starting to run through. I'll keep this up for another few seconds here. Questions now across the board. I think the first step we consistently get is, Carson, where do I start? Right? If we've might have been okay in the past, we might not have had an inspection in the past, or we're looking at a new location. I know I'm working on one file right now where two doctors are looking to take over a previous oral maxillofacial clinic that has been sort of laid dormant for the past 6 months. What would be some of the first advice you can share to someone looking to take over a previously built out and equipped dental space, which now is no longer equipped, the equipment's gone, but it was previously a dental office?
Well, I'll tell you two things that I would do. I would, one, back to the app, I would make sure you walk through this office with the app and see, can I do the things I need to in this place to be in compliance? So the app is a great tool. And obviously, another great tool is to have your dental equipment people come through there. And you want to make sure that you've got adequate space. You've got the adequate physical plant, of course, the mechanicals, heating, cooling, what type of shape is your plumbing in? All of those things. I'd spend some time on that compliance end. Again, start with the app, get your dental people in there. Be very careful before you move ahead. It would always make me a little bit nervous. Depending on how long it had been a dental facility, I'd want to know more about it.
Fantastic. Great. Perfect. Let me just see if there's any other in the Q&A. And really appreciate everyone's time tonight, guys. I think the big takeaway hopefully here is that you're not alone in all of this. There is so many different resources out there for free or otherwise to be able to help point in the right direction, right? No cost, no commitments, etc. But it's important because it does give you a sense of scope. What's needed? Is this, right, a mountain, or is this a molehill that I can focus on? Is this a today problem? Is it a next month problem? Is it a next year problem? Right? And, with the lease, is it, oh, well, it hasn't been an issue. It should be fine. Right? Just knowing is great. Don't be one of the victims that falls through to say, shoot, I never thought it would happen to me. Right? And it did.
Well, your
So,
power, although you're the best tenant in the world, your power is all gone once that ink is dry, right? It's all
correct.
gone. Your power is gone for 6 years. So,
Yeah.
so do this homework now.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
important.
Appreciate it. On that note, Dr. Carpenter, it is always a pleasure and an honor. I will still try. I did go fishing in the Gulf of America recently, and it was incredible, actually. It was, for those of you that don't know, Carson is a huge fisherman, fly fisherman, etc. And it was really unique, actually. I probably had 20 fish on the line. Now we're talking 1 to 2 pounders, nothing of any great
A lot
significance.
of fun.
Maybe,
Good for you.
foot and a half type thing, nothing significant, but it was a ton of fun. And yeah, just off Bradenton, Sarasota type area. And
Well,
it was,
glad you had a good time. It's always fun doing these with you. I truly feel at the end of these webinars, we've done things that will really help my colleagues in dentistry. We're out there fighting for staff, fighting with insurance companies. We got enough problems. We need to make sure compliance and leasing is straight. And plus, it's nice to have young friends like you on here. Eric's about the same age as my kids, so it's great that you still like to hang out with me, Eric. And I really
look at the
appreciate everybody
grades,
attending.
Carson. They're starting to come in. You told me, right? Business ownership, and the grades will come
As I
through.
told you, I warned you. That's right. That's right.
Thank you so much, everybody, for all your time.
Good night,
Carson, always a
everyone.
pleasure, sir. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.